Kavorn studied the holomap with growing frustration. The Galactic Assembly had been watching Earth for decades now, and while many viewed the humans as an emerging species with some promise, others saw only a ticking time bomb. The Hekthar, a warlike and rigid race, had always leaned toward the latter view, and now, with the humans expanding their reach beyond their solar system, the moment to act had come. Unpredictable, unstable, unworthy, murmured Kavorn, summarizing the Assembly's report on humanity. The Hekthar High Command would not tolerate any more delays. For the Hekthar, weakness in the galaxy meant instability. Any race that refused to fall in line posed a danger to their carefully curated order. Kavorn's gaze shifted to the distant blue sphere, spinning peacefully in the depths of space. It didn't look like a threat. To most species in the galaxy, it was barely more than a curiosity, a world filled with contradictions and chaos. The humans were different from every other species that had ever been encountered. They were slow to adopt galactic standard technologies, but once they grasped a concept, they reinvented it, reshaped it into something alien to its original form. While some species adapted, the humans evolved. "Commander," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Vol, his second-in-command, standing at attention with his rigid posture, typical of the Hekthar military. "What is it?" Kavorn asked, his tone clipped. "The Council has approved our next move. We're to proceed with the ultimatum." Vol handed him a datapad, the message glowing in the dim light of the command center. "Submission or annihilation. Immediate compliance is expected." Kavorn sighed internally. This was standard Hekthar protocol for dealing with lesser civilizations. They had done it 100 times before: arrive, demand, and, when the inevitable refusal came, crush the opposition. The humans were no different. They would understand the futility of resistance soon enough. Far away, in the heart of Earth's Central Command, General Alara Kestrin leaned back in her chair, staring at the transmission that had just come through. The holographic projection displayed a Hekthar emissary, delivering their terms in cold, emotionless tones. The terms were always the same: surrender your sovereignty or face eradication. The message ended with the Hekthar insignia flashing ominously, leaving the room in silence. She glanced at the leaders of Earth's defense coalition, representatives from once competing nations, now forced to cooperate in the face of an alien threat. All stared back at her, waiting for her response. The tension was palpable, but Alara felt only one emotion burning in her chest: defiance. "Well," she said finally, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of what was to come, "it looks like we've got their attention." Nods of agreement spread around the table. Each of them had known that this day would come. Since humanity had taken its first step beyond the boundaries of their solar system, they had caught the eye of the galaxy. But no one had expected a move this bold, this sudden. "We're not going to bend the knee to them," Alara continued. Her tone was firm, unshaken by the enormity of the decision before them. "Not now. Not ever." Across the galaxy, the Hekthar believed they were dealing with just another upstart race, one that could be easily subdued. But humanity had already learned from its own history. There are moments when you simply cannot yield. Kavorn felt the stir of anticipation in the air as his fleet moved into position. The humans had been given their ultimatum, and now the galaxy awaited their response. He imagined they might try to bargain, to plead for leniency. Maybe they would even put up some form of symbolic resistance before crumbling under the weight of Hekthar military superiority. "Incoming transmission from Earth, Commander," Vol announced, snapping Kavorn out of his thoughts. "Let's hear it," Kavorn replied, though he already knew what to expect. The hologram flickered to life before him, revealing the human general, Kestrin, if he remembered correctly. She stood tall, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, in a voice that seemed almost too calm for the circumstances, she spoke. "No." The word was sharp, absolute. Kavorn blinked. "Repeat that," he ordered, certain he had misunderstood. "I said no." General Kestrin's eyes locked onto his. "Humanity does not submit." Kavorn stood there, momentarily stunned. This was not how these encounters usually went. Civilizations at this stage of development knew better. They understood that resistance was futile, that surrender was the only rational choice. Yet here was this fragile species, standing in the face of overwhelming force, daring to defy them with a single word. Then you leave us no choice, Kavorn muttered, his voice low. And with that, the galaxy trembled. General Alara Kestrin stood before the council, her posture unyielding as the weight of the words she had just spoken seemed to reverberate through the room. No, it had echoed with finality, a single syllable that carried within it centuries of human history, of rebellion, of struggle, of defiance. There had been no hesitation, no faltering in her voice. But now, in the aftermath of that word, the room was silent. Around the table sat the leaders of Earth's newly united defense coalition, military strategists, political representatives, and scientists. They were all waiting for what came next. General, President Dawan spoke first, his voice carefully measured. Are you certain this is the path we want to take? Alara met his gaze. Dawan had been one of the driving forces behind uniting Earth's nations after first contact, but even he carried the air of someone who wasn't entirely comfortable with conflict. We never had a choice, sir, she said, her voice steady. The Hekthar don't negotiate. They conquer. If we submit, we lose everything, our autonomy, our future, our very right to exist on our own terms. The others exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement, others looked grim, but no one spoke up to object. Everyone in that room knew the truth of her words. Humanity had fought wars against itself for generations, but this was different. This was a battle for survival on a scale they had never faced before. They think we're weak, Alara continued, her eyes scanning the faces of the council. That will break like every other species they've subjugated. But we've learned one thing from our history. When the moment comes to stand firm, you stand. A murmur of approval rippled through the group. Earth had been preparing for this day, even if not openly. Secret military projects had been in development, defensive technologies were being built, and strategies for interstellar warfare had been studied. But now, all that preparation had to be put to the test. We'll send out a general alert to all colonies, Defense Minister Inera added. She had been instrumental in coordinating the planet's defense systems. But even with our preparations, we're still outgunned. The Hekthar are centuries ahead of us in terms of fleet strength and weapons technology. We're going to take hits, severe ones. Then we make every shot count, Kestrin replied, not missing a beat. We fight smart, we fight hard, and we never give them the satisfaction of thinking we're afraid. Do we have an estimate on how long until they strike? Asked a voice from the far end of the table. Days, maybe hours, Inera responded, glancing at the data in front of her. Their fleet is already on the move. They're not waiting to see if we change our minds. Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself. Then, we make our stand. On the other side of the galaxy, Kavorn paced within his command ship. The humans' rejection had sent ripples through the Hekthar fleet. It wasn't the refusal itself. Many species tried to resist. It was the way it had been delivered. That word, no, carried an audacity he hadn't seen in millennia. And that, more than anything, troubled him. Vol, he called, his voice carrying across the room to his second-in-command. Have the fleet begin advancing at full speed. Inform the ground assault teams to prepare for immediate deployment upon arrival. Vol saluted and quickly moved to relay the orders, but Kavorn was still lost in thought. He had seen resistance before, species that had attempted to hold out against the Hekthar juggernaut. They always failed. Their will was broken long before their bodies were. The Hekthar had perfected the art of war, of domination, and they were experts in crushing hope. But these humans, there was something unsettling about their defiance. A kind of quiet fury that seemed to linger in the air after their words had been spoken. They don't understand the consequences of their decision, Vol said, standing beside him. His tone was even, but Kavorn could hear the faint trace of confusion. Perhaps, Kavorn muttered, staring out at the stars, or perhaps they do, and that's what makes them dangerous. Back on Earth, the first alarms began to sound. The global defense grid had detected the Hekthar fleet accelerating toward the solar system. Reports came flooding in, and Alara was already moving toward the war room. The skies above Earth's major cities filled with military craft, preparing for deployment. Orbital platforms were locked into defensive positions, and the fleets stationed on Mars and the Moon were on high alert. Across the planet, news spread quickly. Broadcasts went live, announcing the impending invasion to the general population. There was no time to soften the blow. No time to hide the truth. Humanity was about to face an enemy that had crushed countless worlds before them. But the response was not panic. It was not fear. It was determination. Civilians volunteered to assist the military efforts. Engineers worked around the clock to upgrade defense systems, and across every continent, there was a singular, unspoken understanding. Humanity would not go quietly. In her war room, Alara stood before a massive tactical display showing the Hekthar fleet's approach. She could feel the weight of the coming battle pressing down on her shoulders, but her mind was clear. "Are the orbital stations prepared?" she asked. "Fully operational, General," came the response from her tactical officer, Kara Tenzi, a sharp-eyed woman who had been instrumental in Earth's space combat strategies. "Good. We'll need every defense we can muster." Alara's eyes narrowed as she studied the enemy fleet's movements. The Hekthar were relentless, methodical. They were coming to crush Earth with overwhelming force. "We'll be outnumbered 3-1, Tenzi added, "and they've got better ships. Faster, heavier firepower. Then we hit them where it hurts. We know how they operate. Their tactics are built on fear and overwhelming superiority. Let's show them that superiority isn't everything." Across the room, communications specialists, tacticians, and military officers were in constant motion, preparing for what was to come. The tension was thick, but no one wavered. There was no more discussion, no more doubt. The time for talking had ended when the humans had said no. The galaxy was about to learn what that word meant when uttered by the human race. The first Hekthar ship breached the outer edge of Earth's defensive perimeter with calculated precision. Their armada advanced like a wall of death, hundreds of ships moving in perfect synchronization, blocking out the stars as they closed in. For the Hekthar, this was routine, a dance of destruction they had mastered through countless campaigns across the galaxy. But as they prepared to open fire, something unexpected happened. Earth fired first. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable to the Hekthar commanders, just a few shots from planetary defense platforms. But those few shots hit hard. Kavorn's ship shook violently as a barrage of electromagnetic pulses slammed into the shields, momentarily disrupting their systems. "Direct hit on our forward shield array," Vol reported, his voice tinged with surprise. "How did they?" "They've studied us," Kavorn growled, his eyes narrowing as he watched the incoming data streams. "The humans know how we fight." This was not typical resistance. In past campaigns, the Hekthar had crushed species with overwhelming firepower, their fleets cutting through enemy lines like a knife through flesh. But these humans had anticipated their attack pattern, predicted their weaknesses. Earth's response was precise, surgical. Every shot targeted a vital point on the Hekthar ships: engines, shield generators, weapons arrays. Kavorn's fleet was taking damage, more than he had expected at this stage. "Redirect power to forward shields," he commanded, his voice cold and deliberate. "And return fire. I want a full barrage." The order rippled through the Hekthar fleet, and within moments, space lit up with blinding streams of energy as their ships unleashed their fury upon Earth's defenses. The humans' orbital platforms and defensive stations were pummeled by relentless blasts, shield systems struggling to hold against the assault. Several stations were vaporized within seconds, reduced to nothing more than debris. Yet even as the Hekthar firepower intensified, Earth's forces did not waver. Each platform that fell was replaced by a new wave of counterattacks. The humans had learned to adapt. Their ground-based artillery, hidden deep beneath Earth's surface, began launching surface-to-orbit missiles that homed in on the Hekthar vessels, guided by complex AI systems that seemed to predict Hekthar movements with disturbing accuracy. Inside the war room on Earth, General Kestrin watched the battle unfold on a massive screen. The Hekthar were hammering Earth's defenses relentlessly, but they weren't making the kind of rapid progress they were used to. And that was exactly what she had hoped for. "Status report on the orbital defenses," she demanded. Kara Tenzi's voice was steady, though the tension in her body was clear. "We've lost 3 platforms in the last 10 minutes, but the others are holding. Our ground-based missile batteries are engaging effectively, and we've taken out 2 enemy cruisers." "Keep the pressure on them," Alara said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Every minute we hold them back is a victory." The room hummed with activity. as officers relayed orders to various sectors of Earth's defenses. The planet was holding its breath. Billions of humans watched the skies from cities, towns, and rural outposts. Across every continent, people listened to the broadcasts, knowing that the survival of their species was unfolding in those moments. In the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, a secret military base powered up one of Earth's most devastating weapons. The EM pulse cannon, buried deep beneath the ocean floor, had never been tested in combat. But now, it was Earth's last line of defense, a weapon that could deliver a crippling blow to the Hekthar fleet if the moment presented itself. "We're ready, General," an officer from the Atlantic base said over the comms, awaiting your signal. Alara glanced at the tactical display. The Hekthar fleet was pushing through Earth's defenses faster than expected, despite their losses. If they broke through the orbital lines, there would be little left to stop them from bombarding the planet itself. "Not yet," she ordered. "We need them closer. We only get one shot." Meanwhile, Kavorn was growing frustrated. The humans were resisting far longer than anticipated, their strategies more intricate than he had predicted. He had expected to crush them within hours, but Earth's defenses were turning into a drawn-out battle. "Commander, our forward assault ships are reporting heavy losses," Vol said, his voice betraying the slightest hint of unease. "We underestimated their ground-to-orbit capabilities." Kavorn clenched his jaw. The humans were proving more difficult to subdue than anticipated. "I want full deployment of the ground assault teams. Break their defenses. We take Earth by force if necessary." Vol nodded and relayed the command. The Hekthar ground forces had been prepared for this moment, a full-scale invasion of the human homeworld. Troop carriers, shielded from most orbital defenses, would descend onto Earth's surface, bringing with them the elite ground warriors of the Hekthar. They would carve their way through human cities, crush military resistance, and force a surrender. If Earth could not be conquered from space, it would fall from within. As the Hekthar troop carriers descended, cutting through Earth's atmosphere with the precision of seasoned invaders, they were met with a surprise. Human fighter squadrons, which had remained hidden in underground bases, suddenly launched from all directions. These were not slow-moving ships relying on brute strength, but nimble, heavily armed fighters designed for hit-and-run tactics. The skies above Earth erupted into chaos as hundreds of these craft darted between the massive Hekthar vessels, launching salvo after salvo of missiles. "Commander, they're targeting our transports," Vol shouted as one of the Hekthar troop carriers exploded in a fiery blaze on the screen before him. Kavorn slammed his fist against the console. "The humans, these primitives, are actually pushing us back," he hissed, his frustration boiling over. "Deploy the full fleet, no mercy." Back on Earth, Alara received the report she had been waiting for. The Hekthar ground forces were descending in full force, but her fighter squadrons had managed to take out a significant portion of their landing craft. Still, the majority of the Hekthar invasion force was closing in. "Now," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Fire the pulse cannon." Deep beneath the ocean, the enormous electromagnetic cannon hummed to life, drawing power from Earth's core. A moment later, a massive pulse shot up through the water, into the sky, and into space. The pulse ripped through the Hekthar fleet, disrupting their shields and scrambling their communications. Ships that had been closing in on Earth's surface suddenly lost power, their systems fried by the electromagnetic surge. Kavorn's command ship shuddered violently as the pulse hit, and alarms blared across the bridge. "Shields are down," Vol shouted, panic finally creeping into his voice. "Our systems are offline." Kavorn's eyes blazed with fury as he watched the humans strike back with unprecedented force. For the first time, the thought crossed his mind that this might not be a simple victory. This species, these humans, had the potential to become something far more dangerous than the Hekthar had anticipated. "Prepare to pull back," Kavorn muttered, his voice low, but Vol's head snapped toward him in disbelief. "Pull back? But, Commander." "Do it," Kavorn growled. "This fight is not over yet." The skies over Earth were a graveyard of burning metal and shattered ambition. Hekthar ships, once symbols of unstoppable might, now drifted lifelessly, their blackened hulls reflecting the glow of the planet beneath them. But victory was far from certain. On the surface, cities trembled as the remnants of the Hekthar ground forces touched down. Even with their fleet disrupted by the electromagnetic pulse, the Hekthar were relentless. Their soldiers, towering, armored beasts of war, emerged from landing pods with lethal efficiency. Plasma rifles cut through the air, and their siege walkers, massive mechanical constructs built for urban combat, began their march toward Earth's population centers. Alara Kestrin stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic map displaying the enemy's movements. Red markers showed where the Hekthar had broken through human defenses and established footholds across several continents. Civilians were being evacuated to underground shelters, but not all would make it in time. General, Kara Tenzi's voice broke through the chaos. The Hekthar have deployed siege walkers in Sector 5. They're pushing toward New Cairo, and we don't have enough firepower on the ground to stop them. Alara closed her eyes for a brief second. New Cairo was one of Earth's largest remaining urban centers, housing over 12 million people. If the Hekthar broke through, the losses would be catastrophic. Mobilize all remaining aerial support, she ordered, her voice cold with the weight of the decision. And get me Colonel Jaldan, now. Tenzi nodded and relayed the orders. Moments later, the screen flickered to life, revealing Colonel Varek Jaldan, leader of Earth's most elite combat unit, the Hellhounds. His face was grim, and behind him, the roar of engines signaled his team's readiness for the brutal task ahead. General, Jaldan said, skipping the formalities, we're ready. Just give us the coordinates. Alara didn't hesitate. Colonel, the Hekthar have landed siege units near New Cairo. Your orders are to intercept. If they breach the city, it's over. Jaldan nodded once. Understood. We'll stop them. As the transmission cut out, Alara felt a pang of guilt settle deep in her chest. The Hellhounds were humanity's finest warriors, but this mission was nothing short of a suicide run. She knew it. Jaldan knew it. Everyone in the room knew it, but there was no other choice. On the outskirts of New Cairo, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning metal. The ground trembled as the Hekthar siege walkers advanced, their massive legs crushing everything in their path. Behind them, hundreds of Hekthar infantry marched, their cold, calculated movements betraying no fear, no hesitation. From the rooftops of abandoned skyscrapers, Colonel Jaldan surveyed the battlefield. His Hellhounds, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh recruits, were scattered across the ruins, waiting for his command. They were armed with everything Earth had to offer: railguns, missile launchers, and experimental anti-armor rounds designed specifically for this moment. But even with all that, it might not be enough. Remember, Jaldan said into his comms, his voice a low growl, we hit them fast, we hit them hard, no second chances. The first volley of rockets streaked across the sky, slamming into the lead walker. The explosion rocked the battlefield, but when the smoke cleared, the machine kept moving, only slightly damaged. The Hekthar infantry responded instantly, laying down a hail of plasma fire in the direction of the attack. Jaldan gritted his teeth. Focus fire. Take out their legs. More missiles launched from hidden positions, this time targeting the joints of the walkers. The strategy worked. One of the towering machines buckled, its legs severed, and it crashed to the ground with a deafening roar. The Hellhounds cheered, but their celebration was short-lived. The Hekthar infantry, now fully aware of their presence, charged with terrifying speed. Plasma bolts lit up the night as they tore through human defenses, forcing Jaldan's team to retreat deeper into the city ruins. Fall back, Jaldan barked. Don't let them pin you down. But the Hekthar were relentless. Even as the Hellhounds managed to take down 2 more walkers, the enemy pressed on, swarming through the narrow streets and alleys. The ground shook beneath the relentless march of Hekthar reinforcements, and Jaldan knew their time was running out. Sir, we've got heavy casualties, came a voice over the comms. It was Sergeant Drac, one of Jaldan's closest allies. We can't hold them much longer. Jaldan clenched his fists. They were being overwhelmed. The Hekthar had the numbers, the firepower, and the ruthlessness to grind them into dust. Get the civilians out, Drac, Jaldan ordered, his voice heavy. We'll hold them here. There was a pause, then Drac responded. Understood. It's been an honor, Colonel. Jaldan didn't respond. He didn't need to. As the Hekthar closed in, the remaining Hellhounds prepared for their final stand. Railguns whined as they charged up for one last barrage. Jaldan looked around at his team, battered but unbroken. They were soldiers, fighters, and even in the face of death, they would never bow. "Give them hell," he muttered under his breath. At the war room, Alara stood frozen as the reports of the battle flooded in. The Hellhounds were being decimated, but they had bought precious time. Time for the civilians to evacuate. Time for the planetary defenses to regroup. Time for humanity to prepare for its next move. "General, we've received word from Colonel Jaldan," Tenzi said, her voice quieter than usual. They've taken heavy losses." Alara's heart tightened, but she forced herself to remain composed. She couldn't afford to break, not now. "And the Hekthar?" "Slowed," Tenzi replied, "but not stopped. They're regrouping." Alara turned back to the tactical display, her mind racing. Earth had bought time, but at a terrible cost. The Hekthar wouldn't stop. They never did. They were a force of nature, relentless, unyielding, and utterly convinced of their superiority. But as long as there was breath left in the lungs of a single human, they would never win. "Prepare the next wave of orbital strikes," Alara said, her voice firm despite the sorrow clawing at her chest. "And get me the leaders of the remaining defense fronts. We're not done yet." Across the battlefield, the dust began to settle as the last of the Hellhounds' resistance faltered. Colonel Jaldan, bleeding from multiple wounds, leaned against the remains of a collapsed building, watching as the Hekthar infantry regrouped for their final push. His vision blurred, but he could still hear the faint hum of an approaching walker. "We did what we could," Jaldan muttered to himself, barely able to hold his rifle. "We bought them time." As the Hekthar forces closed in, the colonel's grip on his weapon loosened. He had fought his last battle, and in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of evacuation transports lifting off. Civilians escaping to safety. That was enough. Jaldan smiled bitterly as the shadows of the Hekthar warriors fell over him. Humanity won't break. And then, with the last of his strength, he pulled the trigger one final time. In the command center, Alara received the report she had dreaded. The Hellhounds were gone. Colonel Jaldan was gone. The price of their defiance was steep, and the cost of freedom had never been higher. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Earth still stood, and as long as it did, there would be no surrender, no submission. "Send the next wave," Alara ordered, her voice like iron. Across the galaxy, the Hekthar might have had the superior numbers, the advanced technology, and the experience of 1,000 conquests. But what they didn't have was the unshakable resolve of a species that refused to kneel. The fires burned low over Earth's war-torn cities as the final hours of the battle stretched into days. Across the planet, a grim silence settled in where once there had been the sounds of life and industry. The cost of the Hekthar invasion was steep, but despite everything, humanity still stood. In the rubble of New Cairo, in the deep forests of the Americas, and in the underground bunkers scattered across the globe, survivors gathered, weary but unbroken. General Alara Kestrin stared at the tactical display in the war room. It had been a brutal, grinding conflict, but somehow, against all odds, Earth's defenses had held. The Hekthar had thrown everything at them, siege walkers, ground forces, aerial bombardments, but they had not broken through. Their fleet, weakened by the electromagnetic pulse and the constant onslaught of human ingenuity, was faltering. Reports came in of Hekthar ships retreating, their formation splintered, their advance stalled. "They're pulling back," Kara Tenzi announced, her voice filled with a cautious hope. "Their main fleet is withdrawing from orbit. We've pushed them to the brink." The room remained tense. It was too soon to celebrate. The Hekthar were a force known for their ruthless persistence, and even a retreat could be a prelude to something more devastating. But as the minutes stretched into hours, it became clear the enemy was truly falling back. Earth had survived the worst of it. "They're regrouping," Tenzi continued, her fingers flying over the console. "But it doesn't look like they're preparing for another assault. They're leaving." Alara's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. She couldn't trust the Hekthar to simply walk away from a fight. Yet the sensor readings were undeniable. The majority of the alien fleet was moving out of the system, retreating toward the outer edges of human space. They didn't expect this, Alara muttered to herself, almost in disbelief. They thought they could break us easily. Her thoughts drifted back to Colonel Jaldan and his hellhounds. Their sacrifice had given humanity the edge it needed, but at a tremendous cost. Millions had died, cities lay in ruins. And though the Hekthar were retreating, the shadow of their invasion would linger long after the last ship had left. "General," Tenzi said softly, "we've won." High above the planet, aboard his damaged flagship, Kavorn watched as Earth receded from view on the screen before him. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. Never in all his years had he faced such resistance. Never had a species so young, so disorganized on the galactic stage, managed to push the Hekthar back. The truth was difficult to swallow. The humans had beaten them. Vol stood beside him, his expression unreadable, but his silence heavy. He, too, understood what this retreat meant. The Hekthar were not invincible, not anymore. "They should have been easy to crush," Vol said at last, his voice low. This shouldn't have happened." Kavorn shook his head. "No, they were never going to be easy. We miscalculated." His gaze hardened. "This isn't the end. The humans, they'll pay for this. Maybe not today, but someday." Vol hesitated. "Commander, the High Command won't take this lightly. They'll demand retribution. But maybe it's time we reassess. The humans. They are dangerous," Kavorn snapped, cutting him off. "They are far more dangerous than we anticipated, but we'll be ready next time." Kavorn turned away from the screen, his mind already racing with plans. The Hekthar never forgot a slight, and never forgave it. Back on Earth, the aftermath of the war was just beginning to settle in. In every city, in every shelter, the losses were tallied. Millions dead, entire regions turned to rubble, and the scars of the invasion etched deep into the planet's surface. But amid the devastation, there was one undeniable truth. Humanity had said no, and the galaxy had listened. Alara stood on a platform overlooking the smoldering ruins of New Cairo. The battle had been brutal here. Buildings lay crumbled, streets torn apart by the massive siege walkers. But the people were still here. Slowly, life was beginning to return to the shattered city. Emergency crews worked tirelessly, pulling survivors from the wreckage, tending to the wounded, and starting the long process of rebuilding. She thought of Jaldan, of the soldiers who had given their lives to protect this place. The pain of their loss weighed heavily on her, but there was pride too. They had fought for something greater than themselves. And because of their sacrifice, because of their defiance, Earth had survived. "General," Tenzi's voice came from behind her, soft but steady. "There are requests coming in from all over. Other species, watching from the fringes of the galaxy. They want to talk to us. They've seen what we did here." Alara didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the ruined city. "They're not coming to help, Tenzi," she said after a long pause. "They're watching us now, waiting to see what we do next." Tenzi nodded, understanding. The galaxy had always underestimated humanity. To most advanced civilizations, Earth had been a curiosity, a minor player in a vast interstellar game. But that had changed. The humans had refused to bow to the Hekthar, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that they were more than just another fledgling species. "They'll be back," Alara said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that settled deep into Tenzi's bones. "The Hekthar will come again, and next time, they won't make the same mistakes." She turned to face her second in command. "We need to be ready, Kara. This war isn't over." Tenzi held her gaze, her expression hardening with resolve. "We will be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield into darkness, the fires still burned. But amid the destruction, there was hope. Earth had withstood the unthinkable. It had faced the full might of the Hekthar Empire and survived. And now, the galaxy would think twice before threatening humanity again. High above, far beyond the atmosphere, the last Hekthar ship disappeared into the cold black of space, its engines dimming as it vanished into the void. The war had taken its toll on both sides, but the message was clear. Humanity would not submit. Not now. Not ever. Alara Kestrin stood in silence, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. The galaxy had trembled when humans said no, and it would tremble again. Because humanity had learned one thing in this war. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters, and now the galaxy knew.